Hi, welcome back. Our previous lesson was on income and substitution effects for inferior goods. Today we'll be moving on to Giffen goods. We saw in our previous lessons that substitution and income effects are both negative for normal goods. Hence, an increase in the price will lead to a decrease in quantity demanded and vice versa. Then, for inferior goods, the substitution effect is negative and the income effect is positive. However, if the substitution effect is bigger than the income effect, then an increase in the price will lead to a decrease in the quantity demanded, following the law of demand. So the question we'll be answering today is, what if a good is an inferior good and the income effect is bigger than the substitution effect? Such goods are called Giffen goods. A Giffen good is a good in which an increase in the price will lead to an increase in quantity demand and vice versa. A given good is an inferior good because it has a positive income effect. However, it does not just have a positive income effect. This positive income effect is also larger than the negative substitution effect. This leads to an upward sloping demand curve for a given good. So let's consider a consumer named Steve who consumes good X and a composite of other goods. If we start from a budget constraint B1 and Steve's initial equilibrium bundle E1 on indifference curve U1 and assume the price of good X increases, we shift Steve's budget constraint to B2 and changes his equilibrium bundle to E2 on indifference curve U2. So as usual, the increase in the price of the good shifts the budget constraint and moves Steve's to a lower indifference curve U2. Now we've seen that the movement from to E2 is the total effect, and this corresponds with the movement from X1 to X2. This total effect can be decomposed into substitution and income effect. We know from our previous lesson that the substitution effect is the movement from E1 to EC on the same indifference curve U1, which means that despite the change in the price, the consumer is compensated with enough income that they can still afford the same level of utility one. So this is the pure substitution effect, and it's represented by a movement from the bundle E1 to EC, and also corresponds a change in the quantity of good X from X1 to XC. So if we have a total effect of X1 to X2, and in between this we have substitution effect as the movement from X1 to XC. The income effect is therefore the movement from XC to X2. So what we can see here is the substitution effect is negative, which means that the increase in the price induces a decrease in the quantity demanded, and this is seen as X1 to XC being a decreased quantity demand of good X. However, this decrease in demand for good X is overwhelmed by the increase induced by the positive and larger income effect. So the income effect, which is the movement from XC to X2. So we have XC over here and X2 over here. So you can immediately see that this is an increase, and this is definitely larger than our substitution effect. So the net effect of the increase in the price of good X is an increase in the demand of good X from X1 to X2. And this is because the income effect, which is positive in this case, dominates the negative substitution effect. So since demand increase when price increase, it means for Steve, good X is a given good. So it is important to note that although a given good is always an inferior good, a good may be an inferior good and still not be a given good, as we saw in our previous lesson. So we know that for inferior goods, the income effect is positive. But then for a good to be a given good, it has to be inferior good in which the income effect dominates the substitution effect. This table here summarizes all that we have learned about our substitution effect and income effect, and then the goods being normal goods, inferior goods, and Giffen goods. What we have learned so far is that anytime there is a change in the price of a good, in this example, we are going to focus on an increase in the price of a good. There is total effect, and this total effect can be decomposed into substitution effect and income effect. So for a normal good, the substitution effect is negative. So when the price increases, quantity decreases. And then the income effect for a normal good is also negative, so quantity decreases further. So these two effects, they reinforce each other, which means that for a normal good, when the price increases, the quantity decreases. Then for an inferior good, which is not a given good, the substitution effect is still negative, so it leads to a decrease in quantity. But the income effect is positive, but smaller than the substitution effect. So because the substitution effect is bigger in this case, when the price of an inferior good, which is not a given good, increases, the quantity demand is going to decrease. Then for a given good, which is an inferior good, but then the income effect is bigger, the substitution effect is still negative. That leads to a decrease in quantity. But then the income effect is not just positive, it's bigger than the substitution effect. So this bigger income effect dominates the substitution effect, which leads to an increase in the quantity of the good. So for a normal good, when the prices of the good increases, the demand decreases. For an inferior good that is not a given good, when the price increases, the demand decreases. So these two follow the law of demand. Then for a given good, because the income effect is bigger, when the prices increases, the demand increases. So this does not follow the law of demand, which leads to a positively sloped demand curve. So this is all that we have on our lesson on income and substitution effect. Our next lesson will be algebraic representation of this substitution and income effect. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.